Did I get anything wrong there? Did I get anything wrong? Did I fairly summarize what's in that package? Did I get anything wrong there? Did I get anything wrong there, or did I confuse any of the details? Did I get anything wrong there? The reason I ask that question of guests on this show sometimes is because inevitably, when you are spending 6,000 words a night explaining the news, inevitably, some of your words will be wrong. So like last night, there was this amazing moment at the end of our lead story where I say goodnight to our guest, and he says goodnight, and I think it's over. And then he says really loud, and obviously not to me, he says, "There is an error." This is a very strange moment. Watch. Congratulations on this ruling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick.
I should tell you that we received a response from a representative for the Koch brothers
tonight. There is
tonight.
an error. Hello?
Hello? I couldn't see him. I didn't know what was going on. He wasn't. And he was right. There was an error. That was a really strange way for me to find out about it, but it's true. The story that we were doing there was about a federal court order against Florida's drug test the poor law. And I had characterized it as an action by a federal appeals court, when in fact it was an action by a federal district court. So really, there was an error. He was right. And I'm very sorry that there was an error. I mean, you never like to get stuff wrong, but it does happen from time to time. And when we get stuff wrong on this show, I try to make sure that we correct it. I don't mind making corrections. That said, don't push it. We cover a lot of right-wing politics on this show. I mean, nothing against Democrats, nothing against liberals, but the selection of stories that we cover on this show reflects my belief as the host that the most interesting story in American politics this decade is the effort by the Republican Party to remake itself in the wake of the disastrous Bush-Cheney era. And the divides within the party, and the divides particularly within the party itself, and the conservative movement that thinks it controls the party, I think those are the most interesting and consequential fights in American politics today. And I think that the resolution of those fights, who's going to win and who's going to lose, is truly an open question and a fascinating and important one for who we are as a country. So we cover the conservative movement a lot on this show. And in so doing, we occasionally find people who have been mentioned in our coverage who are absolutely outraged that they have been mentioned in our coverage. People who are not used to being talked about by someone who does not take their instructions. And so what happens is they tend to try to instruct me as to how I ought to talk about them. And the conservative political figures who you can most count on to threaten to sue you and call your boss and scream about their victimization as loud as they can whenever they get mentioned by name in a way they do not control are, of course, the Koch brothers, Charles and David Koch, who inherited a privately held oil and chemical company from their dad and thereby became almost unimaginably wealthy. If Charles and David Koch were one Koch brother instead of two, if they were one guy, they would in fact be the second richest guy on earth. And they have been political figures as long as they have been richer than God. When David Koch ran for vice president on the Libertarian Party line in 1980, he minted gold dimes with his own head on them as a campaign trinket. The Koch brothers have so much money, one of the Koch brothers literally made his own money with his own head on it as a means of trying to persuade you to vote him into the White House. Wow, that's the level of money and that's the level of politics at which these guys have always operated. And when you operate at that level, I think maybe you are not used to ever hearing things that you do not want to hear, particularly things about yourself. And so, very frequently, when we cover the Koch brothers, we then hear from the Koch brothers' lawyer. Our lead story last night was about that Florida drug test the poor law, which was smacked down by a federal judge on New Year's Eve. The law's been blocked by the courts twice now. It was hugely expensive when it was in effect. And it turned out that when it was in effect, it turned up levels of drug use by the poor in Florida that were roughly 1/4 the level of drug use in the population at large. So the Florida drug test the poor law has been an expensive and embarrassing failure from the very beginning. It has failed as a fiscal policy. It has failed legally. It has failed as a bolster for the stereotypes on which it was based. Nevertheless, the political right in this country has successfully marketed that failed Florida policy to lots of other states. We highlighted local reporting last night from states like Missouri and Kansas and Minnesota, who have all adopted versions of the failed Florida law and are all now either reaping the negative consequences of their laws or are worried that they're about to. This is an interesting political question, right? About how obviously failed policies nevertheless get picked up and moved into different states, even as they fail everywhere they are tried. And it's therefore an interesting political question as to who does that? Who tells states that they ought to do what Florida did with a policy like this? Well, in the case of this Florida law that we looked at last night, it's a group called the Florida Foundation for Government Accountability. They went to public hearings in Georgia to share the good news about Florida's terrible policy and why Georgia should adopt it. They went to a national meeting of the group ALEC in Arizona to market Florida's terrible policy to state legislators from all over the country. Quote, ALEC members should look to Florida for free market Medicaid and welfare reforms. So who is this group telling state legislators from all over the country that they ought to adopt Florida's terrible law? Turns out they're part of a huge network of state-based conservative think tanks that is, frankly, kind of designed to not look like a network. They all look vaguely indigenous. They all have what look to be locally specific names. But their funding, if you follow it, comes in part from a central source of big money corporate donors, including groups affiliated with the Koch brothers. Now, we are not the first news outlet to report on the Koch brothers' funding distribution networks and the groups small and large all over the country who've received funding through the various mechanisms that the Koch brothers have set up to support conservative candidates and conservative activism and conservative research and conservative advocacy. And the Koch brothers' lawyers are not denying that they fund these networks or that the Florida Foundation for Government Accountability is one of the groups that has been funded through these networks. But they really do not want anyone reporting any connection between what those groups do and who gives them the money that they do it with. The Koch brothers' letter to us includes a script that they want me to read to you on the air, denouncing my own reporting on the Florida drug test the poor story and telling you that they are not involved in promoting any such issue. I am not going to read their script. I'm not going to renounce my own reporting on this story, because the reporting on this story stands. It is true. And now we also know that the Koch brothers do not wish to be associated with the work and the causes that they have funded through their multi-million-dollar, multi-year massive funding of networks of conservative organizations. You not wanting to be known for something that you have done is not the same thing as you not having done it. The Koch brothers do also say that when we contacted them for comment on our story, it was too late in the day for them and that we should have given them more time to respond. And you know what? That is a fair point. We will endeavor in the future to contact them earlier in the day, and I'm sorry that our call came late. But we will not stop reporting on the political actions and the consequences of the political actions of rich and powerful men, even if they send angry letters every time we do it. I will not read scripts provided to me by anyone else. I do not play requests. I will happily make corrections when I do get things wrong. We do it on the show all the time. But I will not renounce or retract reporting that is true, even if the subjects of that reporting don't like it. Being a political actor means being subject to political scrutiny. If you don't want to be known for it, don't do it. Don't just complain when people accurately describe your actions. Your actions are what we are reporting on, and we will do that on our own terms as a free press. If you want to control the words that are used when your actions are discussed, then speak for yourself. I will renew my invitation now. Mr. Koch, or the other Mr. Koch, you are welcome on this show anytime. I would love to discuss these matters with you right here, in person, live and without interruption, anytime. And it would be easy to set up. You apparently already have my number.